The Blue Wanderer. The old ones said it began with a tear in the fabric of the night. Not a literal tear, mind you, but a subtle shift, a ripple in the inky blackness that blanketed England. They spoke of it in whispers, as though saying the words aloud could draw him back, could draw him closer. A wound, they said, in the veil that separated our world from something else. And from that wound, he came. The Blue Wanderer. He wasn't born of flesh and blood, or so the law whispered around crackling fires and within hushed tones in smoke-filled pubs. The Blue Wanderer was a spirit, they claimed, woven from the very essence of the stormy night sky, a midnight blue entity that moved with the effortless grace of a soaring hawk. His form was barely solidified against the backdrop of cloud-drenched constellations, his silhouette ever shifting, bending with the wind, as though he were part of the storm itself. His presence was unsettling. Otherworldly, there was something about him that made the air grow still, like time held its breath. He wasn't entirely human, despite the coattails that billowed behind him, trailing like ephemeral ribbons, or the crooked cane that danced with him through the air. The people of Hollow Creek spoke of him in hushed tones. They never quite knew what he was, nor did they want to, but they could feel him when he came. He was a thing of shadows, of whispers between lightning strikes. His appearance was rare, a glimpse in the corner of an eye, a fleeting presence between the raindrops. The Blue Wanderer was seen only on nights when the heavens wept, when the wind howled with the fury of 1,000 tormented souls. A storm was always his herald. And it was on nights like those, when the sky raged and the earth trembled, that the Wanderer made his presence known. The townsfolk, a hardy bunch sculpted by the harsh realities of rural life, spoke of him with a mixture of trepidation and bizarre reverence. They didn't fully understand him, but they understood his significance. He was not a creature of the day, a child of the sun. He belonged to the night, to the storm. They never looked for him, they only felt him in their bones, in the tightness of their chests when the wind picked up. Some said he was a guardian, a protector of the hidden places, of the ancient secrets buried deep within the land. Others, their voices trembling, insisted he was a bringer of change, a harbinger who stirred the stagnant waters of existence, forcing time itself to bend and twist into something new. But none could deny the unease he inspired. To see him, even briefly, was to see the boundary between worlds collapse. The veil between the known and the unknown thinned, and in those moments, reality itself seemed unstable, shifting under the weight of forces beyond comprehension. Old Man Hemlock, the village's self-proclaimed seer, shared tales of the Wanderer, his voice hoarse with age and a touch of fear. He walks the edges, the liminal places where the veil is thin, he'd croak, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the flickering firelight. He dances between the worlds, a ghostly ballet on a stage of storm. Where he is, the thin places whisper, and things change. Hemlock's words weren't comforting, but the villagers listened, for they knew there was truth in them, a truth too old and too strange to ignore. The Blue Wanderer's power was tied to the ancient rhythms of nature, and the myths told of his ability to walk through the fabric of reality as if it were little more than a thin sheet of fog. His cane, they said, was more than a mere walking stick. It was a conduit, a tool of immense power, capable of opening doors to forgotten realms, of pulling threads of fate and weaving them into new patterns. Each time he appeared, something shifted, a door would open, a path would diverge, and the world would be a little different than before. It was on one particularly brutal night, a night the villagers would never forget, that the Blue Wanderer appeared more clearly than ever before. The storm had descended upon the village of Hollow Creek, engulfing it in a maelstrom of wind and water. The river, swollen with the rain, threatened to burst its banks, flooding the cottages and fields. The trees writhed like tormented giants, their limbs snapping in the gale. The very air seemed to crackle with electric tension, as though the storm itself were alive, conscious, and angry. And in the midst of this chaos, he appeared. The Blue Wanderer. The villagers had long learned to stay indoors during storms such as this. They knew better than to stand against nature's fury. But on this night, their eyes were drawn to their windows, as though something beyond the storm called to them. Through the torrential rain and howling wind, they saw him, gliding through the tempest, his form flickering in and out of existence. He didn't walk, he glided, his long coat swirling around him like a living entity. The air crackled with energy as he moved, a spectral figure weaving between lightning strikes with unsettling ease. He wasn't simply passing through. He lingered. For a moment, he stood at the edge of the river, his cane held aloft like a conductor guiding in orchestra. The villagers watched in silence, their faces pale with fear. They knew better than to go outside, but they could feel the pull of his presence, as if he were drawing them toward him with some unseen force. Then, he did something they would never forget. His cane moved in slow, deliberate patterns, tracing symbols in the air. The symbols shimmered for a moment before fading into the storm, leaving nothing behind but the eerie sound of the wind. The air grew thick, almost suffocating, as though the storm had paused to listen. Then, a low, resonating hum filled the air, vibrating through the bones of those who stood watching. The river, which had been threatening to flood, began to recede. The waters, which had been clawing at the banks, calmed with unnatural haste, as if the very earth had been given a command to obey. The villagers, their breath held, watched in a mixture of awe and fear. The storm was still fierce, but the immediate threat of the flood had passed. They felt a coldness settle over their homes, an unsettling stillness that lingered in the air like a shadow. Something had shifted, and it didn't feel entirely benevolent. The wanderer stood still for a moment longer, his eyes fixed on some unseen horizon, before he turned his attention to the villagers. A dry, hollow laughter echoed across the fields, a sound that shattered the tense silence. It wasn't joyous. It was a laughter that carried the weight of ages, a sound that hinted at a knowledge too vast and too terrible for mortal minds to comprehend. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone. The wind howled again, the storm roared back to life, and the Blue Wanderer vanished into the swirling mists. His presence lingered in the air, a coldness that clung to the bones, a reminder that something ancient and powerful had just walked among them. The villagers were left in stunned silence. They knew the river had been spared, but the price of that salvation gnawed at them. The change was palpable, like the world itself had shifted slightly out of alignment. The days that followed were marked by an unnerving quiet. The storm had passed, but Hollow Creek felt different. The air was heavy, thick with something they couldn't name. The silences were longer, the shadows darker. The people, though grateful for the river's retreat, could not shake the feeling that something had been taken, that something had been drawn from the depths of the earth and placed into the hands of a being that did not belong. Children reported seeing fleeting glimpses of blue out of the corners of their eyes, a flash of movement just beyond their reach. The animals, usually calm and content, grew skittish, their senses heightened as if perceiving something beyond the human realm. There were whispers in the streets, in the marketplace, of things changing, of the old, familiar world beginning to twist. Old Man Hemlock, his face even more gaunt than usual, declared, "He walks closer now. The veil thins. The wanderer, he awakens the old things." His words hung in the air like a curse, a warning none could escape. The villagers spoke of the blue wanderer in hushed tones, for they feared what he represented. They feared the changes he brought, changes they didn't understand. The very fabric of their reality felt thinner now, more fragile. Every storm brought with it the possibility of his return, and with him, the promise that the world would never be quite the same. It is said that he still walks the earth, that the blue wanderer still moves through the night, his shadow slipping between the raindrops. And though we may never see him, though we may only feel his presence in the moments when the wind howls and the skies are torn open, we know he is always there, waiting, watching. A reminder that the world is so much stranger, so much more fragile, than we allow ourselves to believe. For he waits, at the edge of the veil, ever dancing on the threshold of reality. And we wait with him, breathless, for the next storm. This version has been expanded to add depth and emotion to the story, building suspense and emphasizing the eerie presence of the Blue Wanderer. Each appearance of him becomes more foreboding, and the lasting effect he has on the village adds a layer of fear that lingers long after the storm has passed.